Okay. Um, Hi, my name is Tulsi. I'm a senior digital editor at KPRC here in Houston, which is the NBC affiliate. And Hugo, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hugo Balta, news director at WTTW News, the public broadcasting station in Chicago. And I'm also the president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. And finally, I'm the owner, head of content for the Latino News Network, which is the only English language news outlet focusing in serving Hispanic Latinos in New England in English.
Oh, that's fantastic. And then Treasure?
I'm Treasure Roberts, and I live in Peoria, Illinois, originally from Detroit, Michigan. I am working here as a reporter, general assignment reporter, investigative reporter, fill-in anchor, a lot of different titles for WMBD News in Peoria, and I'm going on about my second year here.
Okay, right on. And Adam shared with me your story, and I thought that was. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Which one? Is it the braids story?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess it was about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks ago. It was actually during NAHJ because we had a collaboration between NAHJ. It was a virtual convention. I posted a photo, I believe, on that Monday of me wearing braids for the first time in my newsroom. And it was really just a celebratory post because I know when before I got into the industry, I asked for some advice from news directors on my reel. And I actually, got some, I guess, advice from a news director that told me to take the clip out of my reel with the braids in because he felt like I wasn't going to get a job. So from that day on, from that day forward, I felt a little discouraged, and I went and told someone else that happened to me. And the other person I talked to encouraged me to, just keep the braids in my hair and to keep that clip on my stand-up or on my reel. And so I took his advice and I did that. So here I am, a couple of years later after landing my job with that clip in my reel. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to post this photo because I remember this person saying that to me. And next thing you know, it just started to blow up. Like, sometimes for people, when you go viral, you don't really see it coming. It just happens. Like one thing leads to another. And next thing you know, I just started getting an influx of comments and retweets and likes. And the next thing you know, you had Good Morning America, Today's Show, AJ Plus, Allure, and all these other people, CBS affiliates around the country, asking for interviews, asking more about the story. So, but for me, it really was more so the fact that I was able to have such a big impact on people, young and old, and less of the, oh, she's Twitter famous. People always say, oh, you're famous. I'm like, oh, no, I'm just a regular person. But the fact that I was able to inspire other people is what's most important to me. So that's kind of what happened with that, very unexpected.
And I think it really speaks to the fact that it took off so much that it was a very relatable story. I'm sure a lot of, people with minority backgrounds or from diverse backgrounds have faced something like that, or, either it's a microaggression or just openly very blatant. And I think it really resonated with people because of that. And Hugo, did you feel like you had something like that in your career, a moment that maybe felt like it was a step back instead of a step forward?
Well, look, I think the Treasure's experience is certainly common to people of color, and it speaks volumes about the lack of diversity, inclusion in newsrooms, and not just the diversity and inclusion of what we see, the optics of diversity, which is often associated with race and gender. But also experience and education. I think where I've experienced it the most, both personally, but also other members of my community, Hispanics, Latinos, it's accents. I often have heard, especially for journalists that are in front of the camera, I've often heard news directors, hiring managers, both in English and Spanish language media, direct journalists into neutralizing their accents or getting rid of their accents. And again, I think that really speaks about their ignorance, not just unconscious bias, but really their ignorance. And to those people, I always give them the example of, I'm from the New York metropolitan area, and you can spend 5 minutes walking anywhere in New York City, and you're going to come across many different people and come across not only different accents, but just different languages. And I challenge those recruiters to say, walk anywhere from New York to Los Angeles. I don't care how large the market is or how small the market is. The most common language that you're going to come across, let alone the quote unquote accent, is going to be a Spanish language accent, more so than a British accent. But in mainstream media, you'll see more journalists from Great Britain because the recruiters, the journalists, are enamored with the British accent, and they always say, "Oh, they sound so intelligent," and what a wonderful accent. I can listen to that person all day. But in truth, broadcast journalism, whether it's television or radio, what we want is to be inclusive and reflective of the community that we serve. And as I've mentioned, statistically speaking, you are going to come across more Hispanic Latinos in the United States, 60 million plus, than you would residents from Great Britain. But the homogeneous management in newsrooms favor a British accent more than a quote unquote Spanish accent because, again, of bias and prejudice.
Absolutely. I mean, that same thing can be seen in Houston, where I live and work, because Houston and Texas, we have a huge Hispanic population, and not at the current place that I work, but I used to work at the Houston Chronicle, which was notoriously, it was very difficult for minority journalists to come ahead. The newsroom was very homogenous, and we had a lot of most of upper management and editors were white, and it is so not reflective of the city that we serve. Houston, they love to tout that it's the most diverse city in the country, but we were not accurately serving our community because we didn't even look like our community, and that was something that we really fought to change. And eventually I moved on from the Houston Chronicle, but that fight has been ongoing for a very long time. And now it seems like newsrooms are taking notice. And if you look on LinkedIn, you'll see tons and tons of new places with race and culture reporter. Everybody is trying to hire it now because it's or hire us now because it's the hot topic. But this has been something that we've seen for years and years. Did you ever feel like that was an issue? Did you ever talk to other journalists with diverse backgrounds who were finding it difficult to get hired? Did y'all ever experience any of that?
Certainly, I think what often happens is, and studies reinforce it. The hiring manager, you have this pyramid of a hierarchy in media where you have the news director or even general manager, but upper management looking very much the same, and then hiring. They're mirroring in who they're hiring. And sometimes that is about gender and race, absolutely. But it's also about experience, education, socioeconomic background, what part of the country you grew up in. And then that creates a downward spiral in management, middle management, and then a lot of journalists and newsrooms having a shared experience, and again, not being reflective and inclusive of the community that they hire. I think that they serve, and that's a problem when you're producing stories, because then they're coming from one point of view, and even in the newsrooms, the conversations that organically need to happen, including debates about not just the story selection, but the focus of those stories, and then the voices of those stories, is limited because, again, everyone has a shared experience. And so what happens is, and especially we see it with people, or in the coverage of people of color, and in particularly with Hispanic Latinos, is that the coverage is then one-dimensional, whether it's immigration, education, healthcare. We're weeks away from a general election. Politics, it's very one-dimensional. It is from the perspective of an outsider looking in, and then these stories lack the authenticity and the authoritative voice that they require. It is when we have a newsroom that has diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just, again, the backgrounds and the optics, but also experience, that we then really fulfill our journalistic responsibility of producing content that's fair and accurate, because now it is based on a foundation of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it creates an environment where differences of opinions are welcomed, where conversation is certainly paramount, but even more so debate. Our job is better when at the core we're allowed to express our individuality in covering stories.
Absolutely. Treasure, I'm gonna let you jump in if you want to. And then we have something from, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Aristides has posted something in the comments, and we can discuss that. It's really a good perspective.
Okay, yeah. So Hugo, he basically said it best. And I know I can't speak for everybody, and I'm sure that it has happened where people haven't been hired because of how they look, because of how they wear their hair, because of their skin color. And I can't say that that was my situation. I don't know why I wasn't hired at certain stations that I applied for, but I know I was hired at this one. And I can appreciate that at our newsroom, or in our newsroom, we do have diversity. Now, I've seen firsthand from being there, and I've only been there for maybe 2 years, why it's so important to have diversity in the newsroom, why it's so important to have people from all different types of backgrounds, so that the stories you tell can reflect not just one group in the community, but many, so that certain stories that happen or certain things that happened are covered well. I definitely know that those conversations are important, and sometimes there have been times where I've had to kind of explain to colleagues or managers as to why something is newsworthy, or why we need to cover it like this, or why we shouldn't say that. So I'll just give you an example because it happens often, and it's something that actually just happened recently. There was a story here where there's a video going somewhat viral online, and Illinois State Trooper basically pulled over a car because his daughter was in the car. And there were other boys in the car as well. So in the video, you can see that the trooper has his gun, like, not pointing it, but he kind of pulls it out of his holster and just has it in his hand. Now, the boys in the car are Black. And with everything going on, I think that a Black person can understand why another Black person or the Black boys in that car were frightened, were terrified, because their mothers made posts about how they thought they were going to die that night. And I think that that's something I actually had to explain to people in my newsroom who may have, said things like, well, not may have, but basically were like, okay, well, what if he was just trying to protect his daughter? Now, maybe that might be the case, but I guess you can't really put yourself inside of the shoes of a Black person to understand why that was so terrifying. So I actually had to, kind of explain that to my boss. And it was all a respectful conversation, but he definitely had to ask me, so can you kind of explain to me, I didn't understand in the video why, what's the biggest part here? Like, why is it going viral on social media? And so then I had to just kind of explain to him why, because that same thing may not have happened to somebody who wasn't a person of color, or someone who wasn't a person of color may not have felt as frightened or as terrified. And so there's situations like that where you need diversity in the newsroom for a lot of different things, for holidays, Juneteenth, things that we know about, things we know how to cover. But even from learning at NABJ, NAHJ, it shouldn't have to just be us though, because we are all journalists. We need to know about everything happening in our society. We need to be able to tell all types of stories. So it shouldn't just be Black people telling Black stories. And that's another thing that I do plan on giving a presentation to my newsroom from what I learned at NABJ. And those will be like one of the things, just kind of stay abreast of what's going on, ask questions if you don't understand, always respectful. But we do want everybody to be able to understand why something is so important and why you should back us when we say that this is newsworthy and this needs to go on tonight. So that's just my attitude to this comment.
And if I could jump on, great example, Treasure, too often people of color find themselves either being the only representative of their particular community, whether it's the Black community, whether it's the Hispanic Latino community, whether it's the Asian community, LGBT community, et cetera, or the only person of color. And so often they are tasked with being the ambassador of their community, if not all people of color. But what Treasure said is important, and I really appreciate that conversation and even that question, because we need to create safe spaces for these newsrooms that are not diverse to be able to ask questions that sometimes could be uncomfortable, and that's okay. I'd rather have those conversations that could be uncomfortable before someone writes a story, publishes a story that then that is less than our best foot forward. And one of the things that I'm very proud of, and Treasure mentioned the joint conference between NABJ and NAHJ a couple of weeks ago, was NAHJ publishing a cultural competence guide for all newsrooms that really help newsrooms understand the Hispanic Latino community as they're covering the community, and really spark conversation about certain words that they use, or as Treasure mentioned, even just having a better understanding of situations that perhaps is foreign to them because they're not members of the Hispanic Latino community. We need to create more of those learning moments in order for our colleagues in newsrooms that are not members of our community, that in a newsroom that does not, unfortunately, draw from that wealth of experience and of people of color, to at least ask questions, whether it's to an individual or, better yet, reaching out to the National Association of Black Journalists, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and so on, as they're news gathering and producing content.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to tack onto that. We had something recently in our newsroom where we were covering universities, and Houston has a few and Texas has obviously many, and we were covering their reopening plans for how they were going to protect students coming back in the middle of the pandemic. And this was going to be, it was a big promotable. They reached out to, and their headline was like 14, we reached out to 14 Texas universities about their COVID plans. Here's, what they said. And in that report, they left out 2 HBCUs, and one of them is in Houston. They left out TSU, and they left out Prairie View A&M, which I don't know if Prairie View is a HBCU, but yes, they left out these 2 major universities. And, the conversation after the fact, we noticed, I work in digital, and so we noticed when we were clipping and adding the story to our website, we weren't a part of that conversation. And the conversation after the fact was, well, the reporter and the editor forgot and didn't think about it. And when people called us out, we realized it was a problem. And I had to make it clear that there are voices in this newsroom that could have pointed that out before they went to air. But it's so important to try and elevate those voices. We can't, especially in a situation like that, that if you've lived and worked in Houston for 40 years and you leave out a university that is in Houston, and it's an HBCU, and you say you forgot, that doesn't cut it. You're not serving your community correctly then. And that actually tacks on to a question. I'm going to jump to the second question. We'll come back to the first one from Shelby. She's asking, how do you push management to hire more diverse management? Do you want to jump in?
Well, I'll jump in. Look, I think the first thing is to ask the question, right? So I think that's an important question. But I think it's always in the framing, right? We don't want to, people naturally get defensive, especially in leadership, get defensive when they're being questioned. I think that it's framing it in the proper way, and it's also choosing the appropriate time to have those conversations. So the first thing I'll say is, too often, diversity, equity, and inclusion is framed as a negative. We've got a diversity problem. We don't have enough women in the newsroom. And so it's a rush to fix a problem. And when we rush to fix a problem, that's when mistakes are made. We as human beings, when we're presented with a problem, the house is on fire. Everybody just rushes, grab a pail, grab a hose, put the fire out. Diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't a problem to be solved. We need to reframe that, and persons like the person who asked the question need to say, diversity, equity, and inclusion is an opportunity to be realized. That's a positive. When we as human beings say, look, I've got an opportunity, now we want to bring other people together. We want to step back and take a look at this opportunity and strategize on how to realize it. And that's the truth. So when you're having a conversation about a lack of management in your newsroom, talk about the opportunity of having management that's diverse, and the quality and the depth of stories that would be presented and told because of that opportunity being realized. Talk about the demographics, kill them with facts. Numbers never lie. This isn't Hugo Balta's opinion. There are more than 60 million Hispanic Latinos in the United States. A large portion of them are US born, English dominant, bilingual, and all of them are bicultural. We're in the middle of a 2020 census where we know every 10 years the numbers continue to move upwards in regards to this particular community, driving not only the population growth, but the economic, political, and cultural growth of this country. Kill them with facts. Be armed with information that speaks to the opportunity and how to realize it. That's how you begin, because the other way around is negative. People are felt defensive. People feel like, why are you telling me how to do my job? Why don't you focus on your job? Turn it around.
And I'm just going to jump in right there and say that, in my newsroom right now, the newsroom I work in right now is by far the most diverse newsroom I have worked in. And I've worked in 4, but everybody who's making decisions right now almost everybody is white. And that is one of the things that, my boss, who was also a white man, he has left, but, and he left just a month ago, and they're in the process of hiring for his job. But when I told him, I remember telling him soon after he hired me, that I was really happy to be working on his team because he had built such a diverse team. And he actually said to me, yeah, but all the people making the decisions are white people, and we need to change that. And I was like, yes, I really appreciate that you said that to me, because I didn't want to call him out to his face. But he was very understanding of this. And when he left, we had a meeting with our news director to talk about, replacing him. And exactly to Hugo's point, I kind of just straight up asked him to his face what he was doing, what kind of efforts they were taking to hire someone with a diverse background. And he immediately got defensive. And I realized that, you know, that isn't, you know, he said, oh, well, we can only pick the best out of the pool of people who apply. And, you know, right now the applications. And I said, you know, there's an opportunity here. We should reach out to the national groups. We should reach out to NAHJ. We should reach out to NABJ, to SAJA, to all of these groups that are in touch with the diverse journalists you're looking for. And I can guarantee you there are going to be some fantastic applicants, but you need to make that, you know, that needs to be a priority. We need to reach out to these groups. And since that first meeting, I've started to kind of rephrase the way I approach things. So just this week on Thursday, we had a panel on special education, and we were inviting people to come join this Zoom call. And they had created a graphic, and nobody thought about this. But when they created the graphic and they put all the faces of the panelists, it was an entirely white group of women. And I'm not trying to say anything about that, but you know, the comments were like, oh, the blonde squad, where's the diversity? And in Houston, you know, if you don't feel like you're being represented in a panel, you're probably not going to join, and you're not going to be part of that discussion, because you're not going to feel like the people you are looking to for guidance and you know, and expertise can accurately represent what you feel and your experiences. And then, you know, when I noticed that, I tried to turn it into an opportunity where I said, you know what, this is what we did this time, but this is an excellent opportunity for us to, you know, to grow. And I'm glad that our viewers are calling us out on this, because this is a learning experience. It's a teachable moment. And, you know, we immediately jumped into action, because the panel was that night, and we tried to find some more people who had more diverse backgrounds. But definitely the phrasing of the question, as frustrating as it is, that kind of made the difference, I think. Treasure, did you want to add anything?
You know, I don't have any advice, and I think what Hugo said and what you said was great, because I guess I'm more of the person that may be in that spot, wondering how can we get more management that looks like us. And that's been, I guess, a concern, not, you know, for me, because in the sense of what I'm explaining to you, they don't always understand. So it's nice to have people who look like you and who can understand and who can interject and who can vouch for you when you pitch this story idea. So I'm just listening to you all and taking those notes and figuring out a good way where I can go back to my own managers and express that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's jump to Aristides' question. She had they had asked at the start, and this is in reference to what I had brought up, which was, you know, I've been seeing a ton of listings for jobs where it's race and culture reporter and things like that. And the question is, but is this new race and culture position compartmentalizing us and keeping us from reporting on more? Go ahead.
Well, look, I think that, you know, again, that particular answer is yes, but no. So next month, WTTW News is going to launch 2 new programs, Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, and Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. And that is a direct response to the conversations that we've been having, certainly since the death of George Floyd, but beginning with the coverage of COVID-19. We knew, certainly before the studies were coming out, that how people of color were experiencing COVID-19 differed from other members of the community because of their the systemic issues around access to healthcare, education, wealth, the types of jobs that people of color do. So it was very important for us in this moment in time in history to really, where there's a lot of disinvestment, and you know, we see it all every week, right? Unfortunately, newsroom budgets contracting, people being laid off, furloughed. We at WTTW News felt it was important for us to invest, to double down on initiatives like diversity, equity, and inclusion that are too often seen the homogeneous leadership as nice to haves and not the what they are, need to have. Now, someone could say, well, you're creating this space that's wonderful, Black voices, Latino voices. Does that mean now that all of the stories on those two communities are going to go into those programs? Of course not. These programs are just going to continue the excellence in journalism at WGTW News across platforms, but in particularly with the Chicago Tonight brand, where we're going to draw from that well in producing these two shows, but providing even more time for those conversations to be had. And it's a symbiotic relationship. So yes, absolutely, what we're seeing a lot of are reactions to what's been happening, especially in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd. But we need to seize those opportunities to have the conversations that the Black community and other people and other marginalized communities have been demanding from media for decades. But then now let's use that platform to, how does now that affect the rest of the newsroom, the rest of the environment? Because that's key. Because if your work is just going to be siloed and it's not really going to affect the larger group, then you're right. Then it's a lot of window dressing. It's lipstick on a pig, and it's not really talking about what needs to happen, and that is change. So take the opportunity, but be skeptical. We're journalists. We're naturally skeptical. Take this opportunity for greater work.
I'm just gonna step in and say that while it is definitely, this push is definitely, like Hugo said, it is reactionary. It's very much we can't continue to operate like this because we're gonna get called out a ton. It is absolutely an opportunity, and right now more than ever, I have felt like my voice is being heard when I talk about diversity in my newsroom. I've been talking about it for years. I've been I've been as noisy as I possibly can be throughout my career, but now finally they're listening. And so now it's the opportunity, and like he said, while having that position or creating that position is very much it could turn into a lip service. It's important to right now voice the concerns and include, talk about how the general people that we talk to in MOSs every day, or the experts we reach out to, they can't be a homogenous group. We're not accurately representing the experiences of our community if that's what we're doing. And for example, we have a traffic reporter here who does traffic, and we've been making a big push towards, we call it What's Driving Houston. She sends out a newsletter. She does the daily traffic reports and then a weekly one. And she answers a ton of questions. So viewers will send in questions about, oh, there's a pothole on my road, or when is the construction going to end? And she'll find out, and she'll answer those questions. And the first thing that we took on just this week, because one of the focuses of my newsroom right now is to better expand our diverse coverage, is let's do this in Spanish as well. So her newsletter, she's going to do one in English and one in Spanish. She's going to record a Spanish version of her weekly traffic report for the weekends and things like that. And that's the first step. She isn't the race and culture reporter, but they're making an effort, and right now is the time to really speak up.
Yeah, I definitely.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I definitely agree with you. And what we're reporting on right now is so important. And, there's so much news to cover. Everything should have fair and equal coverage. But right now, this is some of the biggest news, the things that have George Floyd's death and everything that sparked those conversations after the fact. But this isn't new. This is something that has been happening for a while now, and it's been taking a while for it to even get this much coverage. Why? I don't know. Maybe because people weren't as mad as they are now, or maybe they were mad and it's become a buildup, or maybe because at some point people didn't always have the camera phones right on the scene, but now people are watching. They're out there. And I don't know if you all just saw the video of the man. It was a Black man. He was shot in Louisiana. It was a police officer involved shooting. And I remember hearing in the car, the people in the car, all I could think about was, wow, this is our society now. They're yelling and they're like, all right, we gotta go, people in the car. But someone was like, no, we gotta stay here. We gotta witness this. We have to see this. He's about to shoot him. Just knowing and thinking that, just because it's so ingrained in our heads, because it's been happening over and over and over again, month after month, year after year, people are now reacting and they're saying, this isn't gonna happen anymore. And if it is, I'm gonna catch this on video. And if it's on video, it's gonna make it to the news and we're gonna talk about this. And we're gonna get even louder until you all actually hear us. So I think that this is important stuff. And people are tired of being silenced, and people are tired of being oppressed, and they want change. And I think that we should definitely do our part by covering this. Now, this doesn't mean that everything else is put to the back burner, but I definitely think this is the time. The time is now. Not to say that we're doing too much coverage on it, because sometimes you do see that from people are saying, oh, we're tired of hearing about, this, or this is race baiting and just stuff like that. But I guess I don't necessarily agree with that. I think this is something that all people need to hear about.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. You make a great point. A lot of the comments we've been seeing have been along those lines, and yet it takes a lot of courage to, try and pursue the truth and continue to serve a wider audience rather than the noisiest audience. And there have been some kind of tone deaf conversations, where I've had managers say, or I've heard managers say things like, well, if we continue to cover this, we're going to alienate the audience we already have. Well, that's not the way to think about this. You cannot, and when you hear things like that, you have to push back. There's just nothing correct about that or redeemable about that.
There's like a group of people who've been wanting their voices heard for so long, and I guess I just don't understand that part of it. Where at some point maybe another group may have thought that they've been alienated and that their voices aren't being heard, their stories aren't being covered, their stories aren't being told. So I guess I truly wouldn't have agreed with that statement either.
Mm-hmm.
Managers saying that they're afraid of alienating audiences is just, again, a projection of their unconscious bias, their limited experience, and sometimes really just their prejudice. Because, again, whether it's Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, Black Voices, in our coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic at WTGW News, we knew we could not tell this story from our headquarters on the Northwest side. We purposely had one of our anchors go to a different neighborhood throughout Chicago, the South Side, the North Side, the West Side, and talking to business owners, to community leaders, to residents, to politicians, because we wanted to build bridges between communities that are often separated, not just geographically, but separated by socioeconomic background, ideology, culturally, ethnically. And so your manager saying, we don't want to alienate a particular audience, doesn't understand the bridge building that happens when you're dedicating resources and telling different points of view from the whole community that you're serving. It's short-sightedness.
Absolutely. And that was something that when I heard that, immediately had a response, but that is something that, you know, is widely heard when discussions of diversity and coverage and in hiring are happening in newsrooms where the management is very homogenous. That is a sentiment that I have heard multiple times in multiple newsrooms, and it is just one that absolutely you need to push back on. I'm just going to jump to the questions real quick. Adam says, is there anything unions are doing or can do to push newsrooms to hire a more diverse staff and management? Now, I haven't actually ever worked in a newsroom with a union, so I don't think I'm the best person to address this one.
Well, look, right now I work in a newsroom with unions, and I've worked in newsrooms with unions. I think it's an excellent question. I think a lot of times we don't do a good enough job of leveraging the resources that are right in front of us. And I think that in working with unions, it's a constant conversation about what can we do better in improving the workplace environment for our current staff, always thinking about moving forward with processes, as well as the makeup of newsrooms. So I think the first thing is to have a conversation and invite them to a discussion about improving the newsroom from whoever they're representing. My experience is many unions represent people in front of the camera, on-camera journalists, journalists that are photographers that work with equipment, writers, as well as producers. So I think inviting them, and I have periodic conversations with union leadership along with members of our news team, and we talk about things from improving communication to editorial, to resources, to, you know, what can we do better collectively and also from their perspective. The most underutilized word in newsrooms is, I need help. When you ask someone for help, you're empowering them. You are making, you know, you are giving them an opportunity to have skin in the game, whether it's on an individual project that you're working on, or maybe something that you want to improve for yourself. So absolutely, the only times that I've seen, and I'm generalizing a little bit, management or individuals engage unions, it's when there's a problem. There's been a violation to the contract. That's very important, and I'm not dismissing that, but equally, it's important to say, you know, let's touch base. Let's talk about, you know, how has the COVID-19 coverage been? How has the coverage in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd been? Not just the protests, not just the riots, not just about the systemic racism in policing, but the larger conversations. How are we doing? How can we do better from our perspective? That's a conversation I always welcome, and even to be self-critical, don't do enough of.
Absolutely. That's you made some really great points. For someone who's never worked in a newsroom with a union or who's never been a part of a union, I have always wondered, you know, what it would be like. At the Chronicle, we didn't have a union per se, but we had a unity team, you know, and a chapter of the unity team in our newsroom, but it didn't have or wield any kind of real power. So as much noise as we could make, there wasn't much change that happened because of it. So we can, I guess, jump to the next question. There is a lot of talk concerning our numbers, but what about how ratings are gathered and how that impacts a culture of racism on a national level? Oh, I'm sorry, there was a period there. What about how that impacts a culture of racism on a national level? Many stories I have pitched were shut down because they weren't on brand or our target demo. And on the other side of the coin, focus on certain issues due to race. I fear that once the next big rating season comes, and all of these changes will be scrapped or diminished. That I think goes back to that conversation about, newsroom managers talking about alienating their audience. And like Hugo said, that is a very short-sighted way of thinking.
I also think it's from a business standpoint, it is short-sighted as well. Diversity, many studies have shown, is not just good for journalism, it's not just good in serving the public, but it's also a good business proposition. And so I think part of the problem is, again, in the framing of what diversity truly is. I think also what we've seen, because of lack of diversity, especially in management, and the contraction of budgets, we've seen over years, and certainly COVID-19 is continuing to accelerate that. We've seen news deserts in local news, and thanks to technology and a lot of talented and experienced journalists being displaced, we're seeing a lot of strong, independent journalism outlets. Two that I can name is Palabra, which is the first time any journalism organization like the National Association of Hispanic Journalists created its own platform, because we after 35 plus years, we're done with just knocking on doors and asking for a seat at the table and presenting the case for why there needs to be more Hispanics, more Latinos in news. And so we created our own platform in Palabra, drawing from the wealth of our members in producing content that deep dives on issues, not just, again, the issues that we see in mainstream media around immigration, around unemployment, violence, but also talking about things around education and healthcare, things that, if you're a resident of the United States, are very important to you. And that is really created a platform, not just for Latinos to produce stories for Latinos, but also for other news outlets to be able to work with NAHJ and leveraging that type of quality journalism for their own outlets. I mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, I'm the owner and head of content for the Latino News Network, focusing on Hispanic Latinos in New England. And that was born from an idea of another past president of NAHJ, Diane Alverio, which almost 10 years ago saw the need for news in English to speak to our community. And I'm very happy, 2 years in, to take the torch and be able to, again, produce stories that are not in mainstream media, that are not just inclusive and reflective of their experience, but it's also elevating the conversation and also providing greater visibility of members of the community that are not just leading in areas focused on Hispanic and Latinos, but for all members and residents of New England.
No, that's great. Treasure, go ahead.
As far as like the question, I've actually been in that situation where I pitched a story or stories and they were shut down, or either they maybe didn't pay attention to it, maybe didn't think it was important, or thought, this is gonna ruffle feathers, so let's not do it. Know your market. So I've heard before. And I've always had the question, of course, because I'm in that position, new in the industry, and thinking that these stories are important, but then hearing that maybe ratings are more important, so we shouldn't do this story. But I guess my question to them is it more important that we have these ratings, or we keep these people happy and we don't ruffle these feathers, or we tell these stories and we make these people heard and we hold these people accountable? especially, you know, the people on our city council, school boards, our police officers, our firefighters. And so I can say for sure that that's made me feel some sort of way, knowing that I know something is so important, but people are so worried about ruffling feathers that they don't want to do it. But I guess, is that the right thing to do? Do you know your market? Do you tell a certain story in a certain market, or do you tell the stories that matter in general, or the stories that are going to make change? And so I don't have the answers. I have more questions than answers myself. Just being in the shoes of a reporter and being in the shoes of being turned down when it comes to something that I think is crucial for our community to know.
But you're right, Treasure, because the way I see it is, you would not, in your 401k, right? If you're investing for your retirement, you wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. So why is it that homogeneous news managers are so focused on who their current audience is, as opposed to thinking short-term and long-term strategies that inevitably will lead them to say, we need to diversify our portfolio. You know, I before going to WTTW, you know, I was working at MSNBC, and I was constructively critical of us producing to the lowest common denominator, to who we knew were the base as far as our audience, mainly liberals. And I just felt that, why aren't we elevating the conversation and integrating differences of opinion? There is room to have conversation about what conservatives care about, and really talk about where is the common ground. Because if not, then from that perspective, right, MSNBC, CNN, and other left-leaning media outlets, you can't criticize Fox News for leaning to the conservatives and producing to to the lowest common denominator of that audience, if you're doing the same on the opposite side. And then, how is that serving journalism, right? Because journalism is lost in that. Journalism is about respecting the audience and providing them the information for them to decide. If you're just going to provide one perspective, then you are failing as a journalist.
So I'm just going to jump in here about, you know, from the perspective of a reporter. One of the things that happened just this year was, last year I was given a grant by the South Asian Journalists Association, and part of the requirement of the grant was that I cover something that affects the South Asian diaspora here in the United States. And I pitched something related to H-1B and H-4 visa issues that South Asian women, specifically Indian women, face because of, the whole series goes into, you know, depth. But the only reason I was able to cover that was because I had this grant. Had I not been given this grant, my company probably wouldn't have said, okay, do a 12-part series on immigration that affects a very specific group of people. And yet, you know, because the Houston area has a ton of, like a very large Indian population, I was able to make the case. My editor, you know, he trusted my judgment. And so in that, I was very lucky that he said that he would be willing to publish it, because that was another requirement of the grant, was that I would need an editor to write a letter and say that they were willing to publish it. And he trusted me, and so I was able to do it. But, and we published this 12-part series in May, and it was a digital only initiative, but we, throughout the whole process of the reporting, approached our TV side many times to see if they wanted to give us a reporter and a photographer, and, you know, do this as a TV plus digital overall, you know, multimedia coverage. And we hit multiple roadblocks with our upper management. And for me as a reporter, that was extremely frustrating, especially because, you know, I was very invested in this project that I was working on for a whole year. And Eventually, we just, decided to drop it. It was digital only, and it did really, really well for us. And we had planned to publish it in February, and then we had the coronavirus pandemic happen. And so we went in May, and that was just about the time when George Floyd was killed. The protests started, and things, became very, very, the conversation changed. And now, they're making this change to cover what they're calling it their Stronger Houston initiative. And all of a sudden now they're saying, oh, that Living in Limbo series fits this, so let's add your entire 12-part series into, our coverage of Stronger Houston, where we're covering the fault lines of racial divide and immigration and things like that. And while the conversation has changed, which is great, and I'm happy to be a part of it, it is also very frustrating, that these things, just 4 months ago, you didn't want to put it on air because you thought it was too niche for your audience. So, these are just conversations, tough conversations we're going to keep having to have. Unfortunately, I don't know really if there's any kind of real solution to that without really pushing hard sometimes and having tough conversations. So we are actually right at 7 o'clock. I'm sorry, I thought I don't know, Adam or Abby, if you want to jump in and tell us what you want to do next.
I think we can just wrap up if you'd like.
Sure. If you guys have, if anybody who's watching this after, after the fact, if you guys want to reach out, I'll email out or I'll put my email in the comments, or you can find me on social media. And Hugo and Treasure, if you would like to share yours as well, I think that would be fine, right?
Absolutely. I'm easy to find on social media, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. It's Hugo Balta, Hugo, B as in boy, ALTA. Always happy to engage in conversation about journalism, about diversity and inclusion, and how the National Association of Hispanic Journalists could be a resource to individuals and newsrooms towards producing excellence in journalism. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, guys. This was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you guys and seeing the comments. And and Adam is saying that the next conversation is on August 31st with Soledad O'Brien on racism that she experienced in her career. So I think that would be really good to follow for anybody who's watching.
I'll be tuning in.
Thank you so much for having me as well. Not only was I able to express myself and my opinions, but also learning from both Hugo and you, Tulsi, as well. Those were some gems that you all dropped in. Something I'm definitely planning on taking back to my newsroom, especially when it comes to pushing for more diversity in management. So I'm really glad that we brought that up tonight.
Fight the good fight, guys. It was really nice. I loved hearing your stories too. Thank you.
Get into some good trouble.
Yes.
Yes, we will. Thank you so much.
And thank you, SPJ leaders and Abby and Adam for reaching out and including us. This was a really productive conversation. I guess we can just hang up. Have a good one, guys. Good night.
All right. Bye-bye.